Guys, what's up? This is McAllister's podcast. I'm your host, as always, Coleman McAllister. Joined today, we have a very special guest virtually here. I think the first time, actually, we've had someone from the D.C., Virginia area. Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Ekman, author of the book Deprogramming Democrats. Lisa, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing great. Thank you. How are you doing, Coleman?
Oh, you know, another great weeknight. Doing my favorite thing, podcasting, talking to people. I mean, for real though, I really like, I listened to you on I think it was the Tongue Twist podcast or something like that. It was one of the last podcast episodes you did. I was listening to that today. I really enjoyed it. I think you have a lot of interesting things to say. So I guess let's start off the bat. Tell us a little bit about you. Some of your background and what led you about the book and, what led you to write that book.
Sure. So thank you very much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. And I was a Democratic advocate and lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for a little bit over 2 decades. I moved out there at the tail end of the Clinton administration and worked directly for one of Bill Clinton's political appointees. I spent the next 20 years, I worked for a couple of different United States senators, including someone most people have heard of named Ted Kennedy of Massachusetts, kind of a well-known family out there. And then I also worked for government contractors and a number of nonprofits. At the very tail end of the time that I was out there, I worked for a nonprofit that also had a political action committee, so I also got to see the money side of things in Washington a little bit. I used to say things like I bled blue and vote blue no matter who. And was really hardcore, dedicated Democratic warrior, a part of the Democratic machine, if you will. I would say I made my way to the outside of the inner circle in D.C., so I was not having dinner with the president, but got invited to parties at the White House sometimes when there was a Democratic president where the president would make an appearance. And I met with a lot of the top advisors to the president or the Speaker of the House and that kind of thing. When I first moved to Washington, D.C., I should say I worked mostly on disability policy, so trying to make federal law more supportive of people with disabilities, which often meant expanding programs and spending more money. And so although I ostensibly was a nonpartisan advocate, we worked mostly with the Democrats, and you can probably tell why. If you're trying to spend more money and make programs bigger, you're probably going to have more success among Democratic lawmakers. I really went to Washington, D.C. because I wanted to improve our country. I thought I could make a difference. Maybe I'll work inside the government to be able to make life outside of the government better for people with disabilities. And, often people with especially significant disabilities don't have that much of a voice in Washington, D.C. So I wanted to help give them one. Part of what happened to me, I have a law degree from Georgetown, where I was the president of the Law Democrats there. And that was during the time when Obama ran for his first term. And I worked as a volunteer at his national headquarters doing disability vote outreach. But I have a law degree and also a master's in social work. So I spent a lot of time in school. And I got very indoctrinated, I would say, to the left in school. And I also believe that, I got pretty brainwashed and programmed to really be a tribal member of the left. And during the time that I spent in Washington, D.C., I saw Washington, D.C., as well as the country change in a really bad way, where people started to, I think, assume that if someone had different beliefs than you, if they were on the quote unquote other side, that they were morally bad, that they were inferior, and that you could look at them almost like they're not human. You can dehumanize them because they're not on the same team or from the same tribe that you are. When I first got to Washington, D.C., people seemed to be engaging, in my opinion, in good faith conversations to try to come to a compromise that might incrementally improve things for people in this country. And over time, that just stopped happening. And I'd go to meetings and people would just be, say things like, well, that makes sense from a policy perspective, but that really won't play well at midterms. So we can't give the other side a win. Or, I'm not sure how that'll look at the dinner table, to people, even though it might be the right thing to do. And so I started to become a little disillusioned in, being part of that system. But what really woke me up was COVID and the government response to COVID. I don't think that's an unusual story. I think a lot
No.
of people were made aware of just how corrupt our government had gotten and just how little attention that the left especially was paying to some of our basic God-given natural-born rights enshrined in our Constitution, especially freedom of speech. When we started to see lots of people getting censored, getting deplatformed, debanked in certain cases, I also started to see a really disturbing trend on the left. When I was a younger person, the Democrats really were a party of inclusion. They really believed in being a big tent. And we had, working class people, people of color, the LGBTQ, and educated people and uneducated people. And everybody was welcome as long as you sort of shared the idea that government could be beneficial. Government could be part of the answer to a lot of our problems, and we might disagree about how much government exactly or how exactly to go about it, but government could be part of the solution. And over time, I saw that sort of inclusiveness, that big tent evaporate to the point where there was sort of a requirement for what I call ideological conformity. And if you don't have exactly the right views, then you will get canceled. You will get called out. You will get called an ism, an ist, or a phobic, or all of those things because you are not towing the exact party line. And
Yes.
that is not the party of my youth, and that is not actually a party that I want to be a part of. But the blatant disregard for our First Amendment rights, and it's not just free speech. I like to remind people, it protects our right to worship when and where we please. It also protects our ability to assemble and associate. And all of those things were just gutted with absolutely like no conversation about whether or not it was appropriate or justified. I would like to remind people that there is no public health exception to our Constitution. In fact, there are no exceptions to our Constitution. And When I realized that the Democrats were censoring people, I, realized when you censor people, you're on the wrong side of history.
Mm.
I'm a free speech absolutist. I may hate what you say, I may find it abhorrent, but I would fight to the death for your right to say it because the minute you don't get to say that, I no longer am free to speak. And this was ingrained in me by my parents, who were sort of those older JFK Democrats who really believed in the country and our Constitution and things like that, which sadly I would say many on the left no longer do. As many, former Democrats you might speak to, I would say that I didn't leave the party; it left me.
Yeah.
And I now feel pretty politically homeless, to be honest. I will say I have no problem saying that I voted for Donald Trump for president in 2024, in large part because I believe that he would protect our First Amendment rights in a way that I saw the Democrats definitely would not. But I also, don't feel like I fit in the rank and file Republican Party either. I
Hmm.
think, MAGA and Donald Trump are something different than that. And I think, I woke up and it was pretty earth-shattering for me. As you might be able to tell from what I said, my entire identity, my sense of self all came from my political identity. And the reality that I lived in was the reality created by the Democratic Party. And when I woke up to a lot of the things that I believed to be true, pretty much everything, that it was not, and that the mainstream media doesn't, tell the truth. It is a propaganda arm of our intelligence agencies in many instances, and those
Yes.
kind of things. My whole reality shattered, and I had to figure out who am I? How did I allow this to happen to me? And how do I trust myself again if I
Mm.
had been deceived and lied to for so long? And that was probably the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. And when I finally picked the pieces up and started got getting my confidence back and figuring out who I was, I decided that I had to do something to try to save the country that I loved, because I feel we were very close under the Biden administration to losing some of those fundamental freedoms that make America what it is. And so that led me to write the book, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites, because I wanted to tell my story in the hopes that it could help wake other people up and help people understand what happened to people on the left and how they might be able to help someone that they care about or love, who may still be caught in the web of deception that most people on the left are.
Yeah, yeah, I liked a lot of what you said there. For me personally, COVID myself definitely radicalized me. I think, before that time, I was more of that, Republican conservative type. And then I think when COVID hit, I became a libertarian, and then present day I'm an anarchist. So full on the spectrum. But I guess because you described like I think what people would call classical liberal model, which is what you grew up in, and the left now. I mean, I would agree. I think those are two completely different things. I think you could almost, I mean, not exactly, but I think in some ways you could almost look at classical liberalism more akin to libertarianism in some senses.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same values, Coleman, I think. It's a lot of starting from individual liberty,
Hmm.
and I think classical liberalism had a little more space for government than
Sure,
libertarianism
sure.
does.
Yeah.
But besides that, they agree on a lot, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess let me ask you, what do you think? I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of factors, but what do you think really caused that shift from, this party being more of that classical liberalism to what people call, woke ideology? Really, I remember talking to one of my more leftist friends the other day, and he was talking about how speech is dangerous in the wake of like the Charlie Kirk stuff. And that some of these ideas that the current left proposes, I can't even wrap my head around. It's so far, it's so much further away from what classical liberalism used to be. So I guess I don't know. What are your thoughts on why we've gone from that to where we are now?
So, I mean, there's a chapter in my book called "The Evolution of the Progressive Cult,"
Okay.
which is how I term those on the far left. I don't think they are liberal in any way. They're progressive, and
Mm,
what they're really progressing us towards is communism.
yeah.
And I think it has been a concerted effort to undermine the foundational values and institutions of our country, of our constitutional republic, to create increasing dependence on and faith in the government to effectuate a cultural revolution towards communism. I think that they have changed our school curriculum in a way to support that. And our schools are no longer educational institutions to the extent they ever were, but indoctrination centers.
Oh yes. 100%.
When 9 out of 10 professors at colleges are Democrats, and I would say probably at least half of those, if not more, are sort of far left, progressive or communist or socialist, and believe in critical theory, which is where critical race theory comes from, but it is
Hmm.
straight out of Marx.
Yes.
And it envisions deconstructing all of the institutions of our country and replacing them. And I think that there has been a concerted effort to do that. So I think that it started with political correctness, is my opinion, is the way that they started chipping away at our individual liberty. And, back when it first started, if you said a word that people didn't think you should, or you said something that wasn't nice, people would just tell you, hey, that's not really nice, don't do it anymore. But now it's your whole life can be destroyed. You're canceled, you're deplatformed, you're debanked, you're excommunicated from the community that you are a part of. And so, but it happened really slowly and sort of over time. It has gotten to the place where they're really trying to control the way we speak, which then begins to control the way we think,
Yes.
and then begins to control our reality. And once you cede the power over your speech, you are no longer a free human.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So
Yeah. I think I was doing some research for this episode, and I saw, I think it was, I mean, there it was varying polls, but around 60% of people on the, conservatives or quote unquote right, feel the need to self censor versus I think 25 to 30% leftists. So I think there is just, I think when you look at things like the corporate press and, going back to like the Charlie Kirk stuff, like, I think the biggest reason why you saw so many people not only, in the wake of that, not really care about the fact that he was assassinated, but even rejoiced in it. I think that is a byproduct of the corporate press, right? I mean, we saw for 10 years, almost 10 years, yeah, no, 10 years, this entity saying that, oh, if you, believe, if you're a Trumpy or if you are with MAGA, or even if you agree with Trump, like you're literally a Nazi. We're going to characterize you as the worst possible thing that, the education system has painted someone to be. Right. And, if you think about somebody who was, even an adolescent at that time and now they're a full-fledged adult, I mean, 10 years is a long time. So, I mean, it's very easy to see why people would go to these, in a way, it would be easy to see how people would go to these extremes. It's like, oh, if they've been taught that for 10 years, that these people are similar to the Third Reich, then I can easily see how in their mind they think, oh, well, these people should be. It is okay to shoot these people, right? Like it's sad, it's tragic, but it's the reality we live in.
it is. I think it is a very concerning reality to
Yes.
me because it is a huge shift, especially that the people on the left believe that way. Because, like I said, I grew up in a very liberal family, and we certainly believed in my household in freedom of speech. And I think you hit the nail on the head in a few ways. I think what has happened is that through indoctrination in the schools, through things like safe spaces and trigger warnings and the policing of microaggressions and free speech zones. We've taught young people that speech in and of itself is violence if it is directed at a marginalized or historically oppressed community or a vulnerable community. And I heard, a liberal saying that, Charlie Kirk's speech was violence. So violence in return is appropriate. So I think the schools played a role in putting, that into people's heads. And then, obviously these leftist professors are probably also comparing Trump to Hitler and the Nazis and the Third Reich.
Yeah.
And then you have the corporate press and their intelligence agency connections through Operation Mockingbird that continues alive and well to this day. And then in conjunction with the leaders of the Democratic Party, let's not give them a pass on this because they were constantly talking about he's a fascist, he's a threat to democracy, he's going all of those things. So that combination creates a really, really powerful indoctrination and brainwashing into who Donald Trump is and anyone associated with him.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing just is that especially since 9/11, the government and the Democrats, but both sides of the establishment government have been using fear to
Yes.
stoke division and control us. And so, I think you can see that fully on display. And once you get people afraid enough, critical thinking goes out the window completely, thinking goes out the window, and blind obedience comes into play just to be kept safe. And I think that's what we saw during COVID, especially.
Yeah, I say this a lot. Emotion trumps logic every time. I think a big part of what, I mean, as an anarchist, especially, I am frustrated with both sides of the political aisle. But something that especially frustrates me with the more left leaning side of the aisle is there's like this kind happy face, right? There's this with the DEI inclusion stuff, like, oh, we just want to include people, we just want to make sure everybody feels good, whatever. But that's just not the case. I mean, I maybe you disagree, but I have a really hard time believing that the people in Washington, the political elites, the people who are at the tops of the corporate press, I have a very hard time believing that they actually believe this stuff or that they even follow it themselves. And I think they know that. And I mean, this is just my intuition, but I think it's more of them using this thing to make themselves look good. Whereas, like, you can look at the right and, you take any topic, and I feel like the attitude with people on the right is just kind of like, yeah, this is how it is, suck it up. And maybe that's bad, maybe that's good, I don't know. But I feel like that, I mean, they're at least willing to show their colors in a way. But it seems like when you look at, I mean, and I don't know if this is necessarily true to everybody in the left, but I think when you look at people, majority of the people on the left, or people at least in the political elite positions, I think they are being more disingenuous.
Yeah, I guess it's hard for me to know how much they actually truly believe it
Yeah.
because they're so used to spinning and lying that, I mean, that's just part of what you do up there.
Yeah.
I never would go quite that far myself. I always
Okay.
tried to still be honest. But I think part of what is true is they make rules for us that they don't follow. You're
Oh,
100%
yeah.
right on
Yeah.
that.
Easily.
And I think that what matters to them is, well, maybe two things. I was going to say one thing and one thing only, and that's their own power. But I would leave out money if I said that. So, but that's part of the same part and parcel, right?
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
But really, what matters to them is how do they keep control and how do they keep people dependent on the government so they'll keep voting for them. And I think that is a big part of what happens. I reject sort of the left right division. Really, what I like to say is that the left and the right are like two wings on the same bird, and
Mm.
one gets to flap louder and says, "Hey, look over here, look how great I am," and then the other one does. And in the meanwhile, they're enriching themselves and raiding the treasury and doing all sorts of heinous things around the world in our name. And lately, I've been comparing us, we the people, to the newspaper at the bottom of the birdcage is basically what we are in this whole thing. But essentially, what they use it's one of the oldest control strategies as well, is the divide and conquer. So
Hmm.
they keep us divided and keep us fighting each other in every way they possibly can. Left versus right, white versus black, man versus woman, LGBTQIA versus everybody else. And so that we don't focus our attention on them, how corrupt they've become, and how far from the vision of the founders of this country they have also become, that our country has become. So I think it is really fair to say that there is a mask of inclusiveness on the left, And what it is masking is an elitism of huge proportions of moral superiority and of the desire to institute an ever increasing amount of control over people's lives.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that distinction because I think it. I think what you said is right. A lot of it is political theater. These people who they go on TV or they go in the courtroom or whatever, and they fight it out. They all go get dinner afterwards. It's not this. People like to have this fairy tale version in their head where it's like, oh, these are my people fighting the other people, and that's just not the case. And the reality, I mean, that is the reality that they are. I mean, either side of the aisle is far more concerned with power and keeping keeping their incentives to stay in power, right? I think when you see the chart of from the last 30, 40 years of the military budget, it's consistently going up, right? Because warfare is the reason to keep government in, right? Like if you create a warfare state, if you create a need for this, then people are going to keep buying into it, right? I will say this though, something that I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are. I know you said you're kind of politically homeless and not necessarily on the right. And I think, especially me as an anarchist, I can definitely relate to that. I do think that there is, I remember in the podcast you said your book is kind of, or not your book, the title of your book is probably in a sense divisive, which is fine. There are plenty of things I say in this podcast that are divisive as well. I think that's important sometimes. But I think if we're going to take this last year part of Donald Trump in office, I think two big things that has seriously divided the party is what's been happening with Israel and the Iran war, the 12-day war of Iran, how that whole situation was handled, especially, and more importantly, the Epstein stuff. It's weird because on the war front, you can kind of, I don't rationalize this, but you can see how people can rationalize oh, he had to do this for this reason. It's complicated, whatever. There's no moral rationalization in your head for covering up for a pedophile, this person who is just an awful human being, right? And I guess all this to say, I do think people are going to look at this. I do think we're going to see this huge blue wave 2026, 2028 for better. In our opinions for worse, but some people are going to, I think it's just an obvious counter to it, right? Similar to how MAGA in 2016 came to light. It was a counter to what the Obama-esque establishment was. And, people are people and they're just going to go the opposite way. So I guess what is your thoughts on how that's all going to play out? Do you have any opinions or ways you think that we can curb this? I guess what are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing that I will say is that we have an incredibly long time in politics until the 2026 election. Because people have an extremely short memory.
True. Yeah.
So much could happen between now and then that would change things. And I think for a lot of people, the most important thing is what happens with the economy and how do the tariffs play out and all of that. Because if everybody is struggling economically right before the midterms, then we're going to see a big blue wave. People are going to vote with their pocketbook because they often do. As Ronald Reagan said, it's the economy, stupid. Okay, so that's the first
Yep.
piece. But the second thing about, what you were saying is that, it's very hard for me to get into Donald Trump's head most of the time. Thank goodness, because that's not necessarily a place I'd want to be.
Sounds awful.
But yeah, sounds right. Sounds terrible. But one could imagine a scenario in which Donald Trump created a situation in which the Democrats who seemingly could have released all of these files when Joe Biden was president and did not, were then begging for it to be released when it is quite possible that most of the people in these files are not Republicans and are not Donald Trump. So that And if he would have released them without the Democrats, calling for it, then he could, they could have screamed foul, basically. He's just releasing this. It's not real. It's not true. I also believe that part of the reason why perhaps that these have not been released is that uh, previously is that they are going to send shockwaves through the political establishment throughout the world,
Hmm.
and especially ours.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
So it's a bad look that it seems like he was covering up for, a pedophile. It's a bad look because I don't think he was out there actively campaigning on releasing these files, but certainly surrogates of his were.
Yeah.
And it raises a lot of questions about, I think, in the mind of many people, the Attorney General and the Director of the FBI.
Yes.
And so, I can't really defend what happened there. I am America first, 100%. I also believe that no matter who it is, free speech means free speech, and I would draw a strong distinction between raising questions about the secular government of Israel and anti-Semitism. I
Mm.
think are two very different things. And so I think we get the you're an anti-Semite thrown at us if we raise questions about Israel, Gaza, Hamas, and
Yeah, it's
what
ridiculous.
happened with Iran. And so, and for full disclosure, all four of my grandparents were Jewish, and so but I have a lot of questions about our policy towards Israel, and I'm not afraid to ask them. And I believe the First Amendment guarantees my right to do that. And I also believe that the Constitution creates a responsibility for me to ask questions when I am not sure whose interests elected leaders are actually serving.
Yeah. Well, and I think in a way, we're talking about all this DEI stuff on the left. I think part of the frustration from all this with Trump is, I mean, it's kind of like the criticism of the woke right now, right? Is like Trump is, with this stuff with Israel, with the anti-Semitism. I know back when I don't know if this is still the case, but I remember back when the immigration stuff was really, starting to take off. He was deporting or at least trying to deport people for anti-Semitism. And it seems like it from an outsider perspective, it almost seems like no matter what side is driving, they're going to use these same tactics. So I think a lot of times it's
I
hard for people to, I mean, either way, justify it, right? Or you'll find the people that will just go the opposite way and they'll find their own ways to justify it, right? But it is a really tricky situation.
It is, but I'll go on record for myself and say that I don't believe that any hate speech law is constitutional.
Yeah. Oh no, not
I
at all.
don't care who you are professing hate for. It's protected speech. The Supreme Court has been pretty clear about that
Mm-hmm.
throughout precedent too. I will say one thing though about some of the deportation and the anti-Semitism. I will just say, like, from I'm a recovering lawyer. I call myself because I don't practice anymore. I'm done trying. But when you have a visa, there are certain conditions attached to that visa, and in general, it any type of protest against our government is prohibited under the terms of most of these visas.
Oh wow. Okay.
So now, there may have been some selective enforcement on that, and we could think about that. But it is the visa. The way to think about it, I think, is that unlike the rights that we as citizens have, a visa holder has privileges, which can be revoked for the violation of the rules under which they were issued. And I say that as someone who is a free speech absolutist.
Sure.
I mean, if you're a citizen and you're a Nazi, I will defend your right to espouse your views, even though I think they're really abhorrent and awful. But that's what our Constitution requires, and so I would do that. But if you are a visitor to our country who speaks of things that could be seditious or treasonous or anti the U.S. government, I would also support you not being here. So, I think that is a way to think of it. I I don't know exactly. Obviously the cases that you're referring to, we'd have to get into the details of what they
Sure.
were in order to say right or wrong. I just wanted to raise that as a point because I think it's something that isn't very well understood by a lot of people, that like when you're here under a certain type of visa, there are always conditions to that visa, and if you violate them, your visa gets revoked and you get deported. And you are not entitled in many cases to a due process hearing under those circumstances.
Sure. I guess my counter to that would be, I feel like it almost seems like when you're talking about these kind of things, it almost seems like you're kind of arguing the fine print. And you say you're a recovering lawyer. It's actually kind of funny you said that because both my parents were lawyers at one point, so I totally they're both recovering in a sense. I totally get that. So when you have that mind frame, I can see why you would come to that conclusion. But I guess from my standpoint, that almost just kind of seems like a way to, like, if you're gonna, yeah, I get that there are students from these other countries that are on visas and they don't necessarily have those rights. But I think it's also fair to say that they maybe would want to be U.S. citizens, but it's that same establishment that's, doing all these things to them that is not letting them do that.
And
or maybe that's inaccurate. I don't know.
I think, knowing your perspective, being a libertarian and now an anarchist, I'm not sure how you feel about borders in general and immigration laws in general. I kind of fall down on the side of, if we have laws and rules in place, as long as we equally apply them, I'm okay with that.
Sure.
And then, we could work to change that. I also believe that, if you're coming to our country as a guest, you should follow our rules and not work to undermine our country. But in the particular instances, I think that you were thinking of, I don't know for sure that I would support the action of the administration. I would also say that I'm not too keen on the fact that, we have masked people with no badges and no nothing grabbing people off the street. I'm 100% for enforcing our immigration laws, because I do believe in the current global situation, we need to have borders and we need to have enforce the laws that we do have. I don't believe that I do believe our laws need to be changed. I think that we need some quicker routes to citizenship for people and things like that. But in the meantime, it's really not fair to the people who are waiting in line and trying to play by the rules for all these other people to be here. And then I also believe that if you want to come to the United States, I think you should at least believe in America. You should believe in our constitutional republic, and want to at least play by our rules. Sure. And so that's kind of where I come down on it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I definitely don't want to go down like an anarchist rabbit hole of all the different, where to go with that. But look, with something like, like welfare to immigrants, I don't think that's a good idea. Like you're really, like, you're going to give like the, what people would view as like the most necessity, like the, you're at a desperate place and you just kind of give that right off the bat to people who are just coming in. I mean, a lot. I mean, illegally. Like people who are not, going those routes. Like, yeah, I can see that being that being not a great situation. I guess let's step away from this maybe and because I really liked a lot of what you talked about in the podcast and everything with COVID, and I think you and I could agree on a lot of that. But kind of sidestepping into back to what we were kind of with Mondami just became the mayor of New York City. I do really worry about this quote unquote blue wave. I almost wonder if there's something like psychologically that is at play when it comes to people who identify with the left or identify with the right. And they've actually done I don't know if you've heard of the big 5 traits when it comes to psychology: open-mindedness, empathy, 3 other ones I don't know off the top of my head. But they can take people of different political spectrums, and they can predict like their personality traits, like almost like kind of predicting the brain, the mindset of the like where you're going to fall in the political spectrum. And it's not a 1-to-1 comparison. It's not 100% accurate, but they can really map this out. And when you look at like the last year of Trump, where I think a lot of his base has rightfully so been very upset and have been very split on a lot of those things, I would be hard pressed to see that same thing happening on the left, right? Like if the roles were reversed, I would have a hard time seeing that many people being in arms. I mean, the closest thing I can think of in my lifetime, is the in 2016 the Bernie and Hillary scuffle with the DNC scandal and things with the emails and all that. But, by the time 2020 came around, it seemed like they were all on the same page. They were all with the COVID mandates, and they were all for doing all these really awful things just to save grandma, right? So I guess I wonder what your analysis on that is. Like, is there something about, and obviously these are generalizations, these aren't 1-to-1 comparisons, but in large mass, do you wonder if there's something about like the psychology or like the nature and nurture of how these, individuals grew up or whatever that might make this more of a hurdle to, combat versus something like, the first year Trump, where there's obviously, people protesting that. I'm worried that won't be the case in 3 to, however many years.
So, I talk about the characteristics of the people on the left that make them more susceptible to the type of brainwashing that has occurred, I think, on the left. And there are a few things that I would point to. I would say the very first thing is that most of the people on the left are very controlled through fear. And once you get someone afraid, critical thinking goes out the window, and they're very easy to keep in line. Identity politics has been a huge part of that. If you are a member of one of the groups, and I'll use trans individuals for an example here. They have been convinced that if Republicans get into power, they will commit trans genocide, right? And so they have to vote blue, no matter who, because of that fact. And part of what I think makes them more susceptible to a fear-based attack is a lack of any sort of spiritual or religious faith. And that doesn't mean you have to go to church every week for this to happen. And it doesn't mean you actually have to have an active participation. A lot of times maybe you were just people were raised in a religious household where they're less likely to be susceptible to these types of fear-based manipulations. And what I find on the left and people who are in the cult is an extreme need for external validation. Whether it's partially because they don't have that connection to the source or the creator or however one might think of it, and they may not have gotten the acceptance and the love from their family that they needed in order to have a strong sense of self and a strong belief in themselves. They need someone from outside of them to tell them that they're good, they're right, and that they're have the right position, the right thinking. And that is how they get the conformity, that sort of ideological conformity, the conformity to the groupthink that happens within the cult, the progressive cult, as I call it. And I just don't find that most independent thinkers or most people on the right need that external validation in the same way. And I will often hear people who are, libertarians or on the right or independents say, I just don't really care what you think of me. And it's not that they don't, all of us do to a certain extent, but an intense need for to be liked and to be right, and to feel like you are part of a group, contributes to people on the left being susceptible to that fear-based manipulation, but also being unwilling to stand up against anybody else on the left and to stay sort of in lockstep with it. The other thing that has happened on the left, I think, is that they have sort of replaced their any religious faith with almost a religious faith in government and experts. So what I like to say is they worship authority and they idolize the expert. And what that causes within them oftentimes is the ability to hold a great deal of cognitive dissonance. You often will hear someone say, like, how can that person actually believe those two things? They just don't go together. They can't both be true. But if an expert, which is someone in their mind who has been educated, right, and has the degrees, and then also has the credentials, whatever license or certification that the government has given them, if two experts said two things that don't go together, they will believe both of them because they have to believe the experts. So even though those two things can't possibly be true, they will believe it. That is why, for example, when Anthony Fauci said you don't need masks, they believed it. And then when he turned around and said, yeah, you actually do need masks, they believed it. And when he said, hey, maybe you want to wear two masks, he did actually say that at one point. They believed it. It's and that is something that, and I'm not saying there aren't hypocrites or people on the right can't have cognitive dissonance, but I think it's that faith in the expert that they have been cultivated and indoctrinated to have that causes them to walk in lockstep with things that just don't make any sense going together. And I was guilty of that myself, and I talk about some ways in which I think I was guilty of that in the book. And I just don't see that same kind of thing on the right or in people who are libertarian or independent or yeah, and it results in a lack of thought. It's like if you, I don't know if you watched any of the interviews of people who were attending the No Kings protests that happened
Uh,
a little while ago.
Not
Yeah,
really,
I
no.
know. It was terrible. They'd ask them and they'd repeat a talking point,
Yeah.
and let's say that talking point is, well, Trump's violating the Constitution. Well, how? Can you explain to me what he's doing? And almost none of them could because
Yeah.
there's no thought behind it. It's a repetition of what the media, as we were talking about, and then the Democratic leaders have repeated over and over and over again to them, so they repeat it back. But there's no thinking behind it, and I think that that's a good example of just sort of how the fear, because there has been complete fear mongering that Trump's going to destroy democracy. He's going to, become a king, an authoritarian king. And so there's no thinking behind it. And I think that is why you see very few people on the left able to break free from it.
So I will say I kind of disagree with you. Like I liked a lot of what you said, especially towards the end. But as someone who's personally an atheist as well, I do think that's a little bit of an oversimplification when you look at why the left is the way they are. I think there's a lot of things in religion that are also not logically sound. We don't need, and this isn't by any means trying to get to any kind of religious debate or disrespect that point of view, but like the idea that God is all loving, all powerful, all kind, but also allows tragedy to happen. And I think a lot of times, Christians will have their explanation and they'll default to God, but I mean that in itself is also illogical, right? I don't think it's wrong to say that there's a relation to that. I definitely think that because as an atheist, I think one of the most frustrating things in dealing with other atheists is that, yes, they do tend to be leftist. They do tend to, there was the point where they literally said Fauci is science, which for anybody who's a real scientific minded person, it's just like, no. that didn't go through any scientific method. That's religion. That's religion placed in. But I think the difference. I think the difference in that example specifically is government ran science versus science, the methodology, right? Like gravity, we can all test gravity, and that's because of the scientific method, and that's a fact, right? That's a objective reality. So yes, I do think that it is related in a sense. I do think that this there has been a drill like in that. Even though I know a lot of leftists who are religious, and I think it is also important to point out that socialism is actually a Christian ideology that was started in the Enlightenment. But that aside, I do think that there is a relation to that in terms of like this side of the aisle has pushed away from that, but I don't think it's unfounded. Like, I do think that there is a legitimate criticism to, like, there are these, really powerful churches, really powerful, Republican backed people. And and you talk about like, fear on the left. I think there's just as much fear of God on the right. In my opinion.
So, let me see how I can try to explain. I'm not sure I disagree with you,
Okay.
Coleman. It's sort of the, basically, I think people often want to be connected to something bigger than themselves. And so
Yes.
they will put faith somewhere. And when you went, whether it is hypocritical or you can't prove it, when people put their faith in God, it often gives them a level of comfort
Yes.
that doesn't allow them to be controlled through fear of other humans, right?
I don't know if that's true, though. I think there are a lot of times where pastors and religious figures have used, things to control people and to fearmonger. And
I would draw a distinction between organized religion and faith. I
Okay.
think that there is a big difference between that. Yes, churches, there are all sorts of churches that I think are horrible institutions. I think
yeah.
so many of them are just about money. I think so many of them now no longer actually give back to the community in any way. There are all sorts of things. And I personally believe over time, organized religion has been a huge control mechanism, okay?
Yes.
Modern day people of true faith, I'll just put it that way, leaving out that, have this, in my experience, have this sense of peacefulness, this sense of the fact that God has them covered, that God has their back, that everything's going to be okay, in a way that most of the people I meet who don't have that don't have that. And it
Sure.
is what I think leaves them more open to fear-based attacks. But I also think that so many people on the left have taken that kind of faith and put it into the government. And
Yeah, that I agree with 100%. Yeah.
unquestioning, unblinding faith in the government. And so when the government frightens them, they are willing to do whatever the government says in order to be safe. And I think you saw that during COVID. People, like, I was talking to someone on a podcast not that long ago who told me that his neighbor actually called the cops on him during 2 weeks to flatten the curve because he was walking alone at night without a mask and was not an essential worker. That is, the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where that fear just... And also, just to be clear, I don't think everybody who is religious is exempt from this, and I don't think everybody who isn't religious is subject to it. It's just my experience of people on the left being like sort of embedded in it in Washington, is that generally they are not very religious people. They don't have that faith, and they've placed that faith in the government, and they are extremely motivated by fear.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I think part of it too, I guess if my analysis, if I were to look at this, I would say it's not so much faith, it's more just the human condition, the human nature. I mean, whether we want to call it faith or fear or whatever, I mean, I think this is just how human beings psychologically act. I think on the point of, your point where like faith is kind of the distinguishment. I remember hearing Alex O'Connor talk about, how like he even kind of gives he gives credence to the idea of like, maybe it is true that people act better as Christians or religious people or whatever. But what if I just don't believe it? Like, what if I acknowledge all that, but I just, at the end of the day, I don't believe there's a God? Like, is the choice to lie? And I don't know if that's right either. So I do wonder if it is more about in my theory, I wonder if it's more about the reaction to, this period of a lot of religiousness, high church attendance, this Christian culture that was in America for decades, that is now kind of culminating to this leftist ideology. I wonder if it's more so a reaction to that versus that lack of faith is the cause of that. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I would say, I think my parents may have been part of the reaction to that. I think, but I think what, one can choose to behave in a very Christian way without believing in God. One can, for example, believe in the golden rule. One can believe in the moral code embodied in the Ten Commandments, for example, and not believe in God. And I am not saying that I wasn't meaning to imply in any way that religious people are better or worse or anything. Yeah. What I just have seen was that difference. And so the other, I guess that, but those were the main, I think, differences that I really saw. I think the other thing is that, people on the left tend to be more highly educated. And the indoctrination is 100% part of what happens to people on the left. Happens in schools.
The education system is hugely complicit in that. I agree, 100%. And when it comes to the education thing, there's like an incentive, right? It's about passing. So I mean, even if you don't necessarily, believe the DEI or whatever that they're preaching, you want to get the A, right? You want to get the certificate. So it's even if they do I think over time it just eventually fosters a culture. But like what it really starts from is incentives, where it's like, okay, I remember in 2014, I don't know the exact, but we'll just say Hollywood in general. For the Oscars, they put out this thing where they were like, "Hey, we need to, like, if you want to be nominated for an Oscar, you need to meet like this 25% quota of diversity inclusion or whatever." And you can say, "Oh, well, they weren't like pointing at everyone saying, 'Hey, you have to cast XYZ person in your movie.'" But I mean, you don't really need to because it creates an incentive, right? Like if your movie gets nominated for an Oscar, that means your movie's gonna make more money, right? So that indirectly creates an incentive for people to do that, and I think that's powerful stuff. I mean, I think in the education system, that's rampant.
It's very, really, really powerful. And, I talk about the steps to indoctrination in the book. And a system of reward and punishment is part and parcel to indoctrination. And
Yes.
that's what grades are. That's what,
Yeah.
you won't do well. You won't graduate. You won't get a good grade if you don't toe the line and repeat back everything that has been said to you. And repetition, the more you do it, the more indoctrination becomes. So the longer someone stays in school, the more they believe, what, authority is already always right. I'm not supposed to ask questions. I'm supposed to just stay, toe the line and regurgitate what has been said to me. And I use my dad as an example sometimes. My dad was what they call all but dissertation towards his doctorate, and he tried 3 times, but his doctoral committees always argued with him about his dissertation, so he never finished it. And he retook classes over and over again, but it was because he refused to submit to certain orthodoxies, I guess you could say, in the area that he was studying. He was a middle school principal, so it was education related, and he refused to rewrite his dissertation in the way they wanted, and so he ended up never getting his doctorate degree. And when it comes to science, yeah, I talk about the scientific method in the book, and I talk about how far from actual real science we are
Oh yeah.
in most of
Agree.
the areas of what the government regulates and how captured industry is about that. But I what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I mean, like basically, if you think about it this way, so peer-reviewed research is supposed to be the gold standard, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you have 10 of your peers reviewing your groundbreaking paper that will make all of their life's work disappear,
Yes. Yes.
how are you ever going to get that peer review through? So it's peer review is like the opposite of the scientific
Yeah.
method,
Oh
basically.
yeah.
It is shutting down. And two things that I like to say, my two little catchphrases since I woke up, Coleman, are question everything and follow the
Yes.
money.
Yes.
And when it comes to science, the those two are 100% follow the money. Where did it come from? Who benefited from it? And where did it go? And you'll often see a very different picture than you're being told. But I also always like to say, and this came out a lot during COVID, I think, is that the word doctor is practically indoctrinated. So they are
I never thought
completely,
of that. That's hilarious.
yeah. So, but the sort of they can't question anything. They can't, and many who did found themselves before licensing boards. If they tried ivermectin or if they
Yeah.
questioned the protocol with remdesivir, which I hear some of them call "Whoa, death is near," instead. But if they did any of that, the establishment would come down really hard on them. So doctors are very, indoctrinated, and many of them, contribute in that way. But I think, that's the other thing, that I think we've seen a huge push to get everyone that we possibly can to go to college. And that has led to a glut of college educated women, especially, most of whom are on the left,
Oh,
as a result of the indoctrination they received during their education.
oh yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I think they outrank men in graduation rates, which I mean, that's not even to say that like it's that they're getting some unfair advantage. Like maybe they are really good, like biologically gaining the system, right? But yeah, I mean, it does create an outcome. I this is also coming from an anarchist perspective, but like I find education to be one of the most worthless uses of taxpayer dollars in this current day and age. I mean, maybe you disagree with this, but I mean, like, I think in the face of AI, especially, I could take my phone and compare it to an entire college campus, and it there's not even close. It's not even a match. And when education was first founded, it kind of, in a way, it kind of made sense, right? Because it was like, oh, the political elite, they have all this information, they have all these books that are really expensive that people can't. So, we'll have people pay a fee and then they'll have access to that information, right? Nowadays, everybody has access to the information. I mean, if you want to learn anything, you're not going to go, like, if I want to learn how to speak French, I'm not going to go to my college and figure out, like, what class can I take to learn French. I'm going to go to my phone and I'm going to learn it in a fourth of the time, right? So I think as you see this progress, you see more of these leftist elite types like harp about how important education is. And to me, it's just like, it's one of the like the most glaring, like, paper mache, not an actual monolith, right? Like it's sand, right? Like it's worthless essentially.
It is. I often tell people when I talk to them, if you have a kid who's in elementary school, homeschool them if there's any way that you can.
Yeah, I agree.
And I really would caution to say at this point, most degrees are not worth the paper that they're printed on. Learn to build something, fix something, or make something. Because most white collar or laptop class jobs are going to disappear because of AI. Why would I want an accountant when I can have AI do my taxes? Why would I want, you know, I think doctors even are going to suffer from this because I think a computer AI program is probably going to be able to do diagnoses much better than a doctor can. Although we could talk about the sick care system some other time.
Sure, yeah.
I'm not a big fan of Western medicine at this point,
I think
but
you and I would agree there.
yeah, I don't go to the doctor pretty much, but I think that we we stopped teaching people how to think a long time ago in schools, both elementary and higher education, and we began telling them what to think.
Yes.
And it was to serve the establishment, to serve the system, to serve the economic oligarchy. We want good, compliant workers who can regurgitate facts and do what they are told, show up on time. And, I talk in the book about how much elementary school actually resembles prison, how little difference there is. You stand on the line, you only go where you're told. And you only talk when you have permission, and you show up on time whether you want to or not. And so there's a lot of similarities, but and you're basically the model hasn't changed that much since they were training people to be factory workers, which is
Yeah.
basically show up on time, sit in this one spot for 8 hours doing this job, and then leave. And so that's the way school trained people to be. And so I don't disagree with you, and that's why like The full title of my book is, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites.
Yes.
Because of education, I view education as one of the primary tools of creating control over the citizenry. And I think that they have also changed the curriculum significantly to where it really does undermine belief and faith in our constitutional republic. I know as an anarchist, you might not have a lot of belief or faith in our constitutional republic, but I think that it is a bad a bad thing for me as a taxpayer, as a property owner. My property taxes go to pay for the education of my neighbor's children, and to educate them in a way that undermines our system like that. I don't think I ought to be paying for that.
Hey, I 100% agree with that for sure. Lisa, we're at the end of the episode, but before we wrap up, maybe tell people where they can find the book or find out more about you.
Sure. Yeah, you can check out my website at deprogrammingdemocrats.com, and the book is on Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Awesome. Guys, McAllister's podcast, you know what's up. I'm going to be taking a little bit of a hiatus for the remainder of the year. I think I'm going to be taking some time off podcasting because I'm a mentally ill person. I need time to recover and rest. So that's what I'm doing. But back in January, we should be off the bat with some great episodes talking politics or local Iowa stuff or whatever, Iowa out in the Midwest, fun stuff. So check that out. Otherwise, we do game streams all the time and doing a bunch of stuff. So have a good night, everybody. Peace.